to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. A little bit later in the show, I'm going to be speaking with Senator Kristin Roers about an amendment she offered to a bill in the Senate to bring back the question of decriminalizing marijuana, recreational marijuana. Of course, medical marijuana has been made legal in North Dakota. That's being implemented. In fact, it's available now. We have stores opening. There's one open in Fargo, and there's more going to open across the state. What we're dealing with now is the question of recreational marijuana. And decriminalization, despite the term, doesn't mean that it's not criminal, as you and I might use the word, to use marijuana. Basically, it just means that we're lowering the penalties for having marijuana, like possessing small amounts of marijuana or marijuana paraphernalia. You'll hear that interview with Senator Roers later in the show. But before we get there, I want to talk about State Representative Ruth Buffalo for a moment. Now, I had a story on the blog, and I talked about it on this podcast previously. Representative Buffalo recently attended an event in Tennessee that was put on by a group called Represent.us. Now, this is it's a national left-wing group. They allege that they are in favor of bringing transparency and accountability to politics. It sure looks like it's about shutting up the opponents of left-wing politics. They were big backers of Measure 1 in North Dakota. They invested six figures, in the ballpark of $150,000 towards, paying for people to collect it. It was supposedly a grassroots movement, but they paid for people to collect their signatures, and they paid for a slick marketing campaign behind, the figureheads that they picked to represent them in North Dakota. And then they, this rally in Tennessee, they had like A-list Hollywood celebrities, Jennifer Lawrence and people like that, Ed Helms from The Office. They were there, and, the figureheads of the North Dakota campaign, Ellen Chafee and Dina Butcher, they got an award. And then State Representative Ruth Buffalo was one of the featured speakers. And it was, a lot of the speakers were A-list speakers. Again, it was like Hollywood celebrities and, nationally recognizable political figures. And then a not even one-term state representative from North Dakota who's been elected for exactly months, who isn't even done with her first legislative session yet, and now all of a sudden she's a featured speaker. Now, I thought it was interesting because, again, this is the group that passed, an amendment to our state constitution that, would restrict the interactions between lawmakers like Representative Buffalo and political groups like Represent.us. So to me, that was interesting, right? The group that backed Measure 1, that spent a ton of money to pass Measure 1 in North Dakota, is now, has a state lawmaker as a featured speaker. Was she paid for the speech? Did they cover her expenses? I didn't know. And what do you do if you're somebody like me in the media who doesn't know the answer to a question? Well, you ask the question. So I asked the question of Representative Ruth Buffalo, and she didn't respond to me. I actually asked the question last week, and, on Thursday last week, I gave her till Monday to respond. I also called the cell phone number listed on her legislative biography, and she didn't respond to me. And so to me, that became the story, right? The fact that you have a state official who is not answering questions about her travel disclosure. Now, to be clear, she still hasn't responded to me, but what she did do is she went to a left-wing publication in Fargo called the High Plains Reader. Now, I like the High Plains Leader. They are definitely left-wing. But, the people behind it, in the past have not been such bad people. In fact, believe it or not, I actually wrote a column for the High Plains Reader for a while. But they, Representative Buffalo went to the High Plains Reader, and their story about that situation was not that Representative Buffalo had, accepted money or that she had gone to this event or anything like that. No, the headline was, and I'm going to read it for you here. I quote, "Right-wing media attack Representative Buffalo again." Because how dare we nefarious right-wingers ask an elected official for details about her financial relationship with a political group active in North Dakota politics? Could there be a more mainstream question for a politician than, hey, did you accept any payments or reimbursements from this political group when you went and spoke there? Is there anybody in America who thinks that that's an unfair question for an elected official? But yet, for some reason, I asked the question, and the High Plains Reader spends 8 paragraphs, talking about how poor Ruth Buffalo and all these attacks on her from right-wing media before they finally get to where she discloses how much she spent. And it turns out her lodging expenses totaled $578.94. And there were $848 for her to have an economy seat on United Airlines. That's from Representative Buffalo. Now, I'll be honest with you. If Representative Buffalo had just disclosed those amounts to me, I probably wouldn't have written my original story. I don't consider those figures to be, frankly, all that controversial. And in fact, I don't even think her attendance at the event was all that controversial. I was only interested in it because it sure seems like the type of thing that Represent.us through Measure 1 as passed here in North Dakota, it seems like the sort of thing they're trying to restrict. And the fact that Representative Buffalo wouldn't just disclose the most basic details about the trip, I thought it was kind of interesting, right? I mean, to me, that's newsworthy, right? Politician won't talk about her relationship with a political group. I'm sorry, there's nobody who is concerned about, accountability for elected officials who shouldn't think that that's a story. Now, Buffalo went on and she said that she refused to answer the question because, and she wasn't quoted directly. This is quote unquote reporter C.S. Hagan attributing words to Buffalo, not quoting her directly. But she said, I'm Rob Port, I'm not a real journalist. And then, she goes on and she said that she didn't respond because, quote, she said she knows her words will be twisted. Now, to me, that's irrelevant, right? I mean, what if I was just a member of the public, right? What if I was just one of Representative Buffalo's constituents from her Fargo area legislative district, and I asked her the question, and she knew that I was somebody who was active in local politics, and she knew that I was somebody who might be critical of her. Would she have a right then to not answer the question? Does Representative Buffalo only get to talk to people who aren't going to be critical of her? I mean, is that how she thinks this works? Is that how she thinks journalism works? That she's only going to talk to journalists who aren't going to ever produce any negative copy for her? I mean, listen, Representative Buffalo is a very, very, very left-wing politician. Her and I don't see eye to eye much at all on politics, but I asked her a question via official channels politely. She declined to answer. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And yeah, her answer, I may well have been critical of her. In fact, I plan on probably being critical of Representative Buffalo in the future. If she does something that I agree with, I might even praise her. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But that's a lame excuse to be like, well, I knew he was going to twist my words. Well, no, I'm not going to twist your words. No, I'm not going to misquote you. I'm probably going to write things you don't agree with. But you know what? Tough. If you didn't want that sort of thing, Representative Buffalo, then you shouldn't have run for elected office. And if you're not interested in being criticized, if you can't take the heat, hey, maybe you need to find something else to do with your time. Because clearly you're not cut out to hold public office. I'm fond of saying that the price of admission to a free society is that you're going to have to see and hear things that you don't like sometimes. Right? I mean, if we're going to have the First Amendment, then it's going to protect unpopular speech. Because if the First Amendment was just about, talking about the weather or talking about baseball or something, or things that most of us don't find controversial at all, then, well, we wouldn't really need the First Amendment, would we? No, we need the First Amendment to protect speech that's unpopular. We need the First Amendment to protect ideas and expressions that most people don't like. I mean, if you want to live in a free society, so I say that all the time. Well, I think also the price of admission to elected office is understanding you're going to be criticized. Now, I realize we live in very polarized times, and you turn on cable news and it's downright depressing. And I realize that not everybody likes my style of politics, because I definitely come in, I wear my thoughts. I mean, I wear my biases on my sleeve. I mean, I guess conservative / libertarian is how people describe. I mean, I understand I'm a little hard to pigeonhole because I'm pretty socially liberal, pretty fiscally conservative. That's probably generally where I'm at. I'm not sure where that puts me on the ideological spectrum, but I like to say I'm conservatively libertarian. That's where I'm at. Definitely right of center. And I wear that up on my sleeve. And I'm going to be critical of people who are left of center. I'm going to be critical of progressive ideas and liberal ideas. And you know what? People just got to deal with it. And politicians don't get to pick and choose who does this. Now, there was another North Dakota politician who liked to do this to me, Senator Heidi Heitkamp. She liked to, former Senator Heidi Heitkamp. She spent pretty much the entirety of her office. It wasn't until the final days of her time in office right before the election that she finally had to come on my radio show at the time on WDAY. She came on and she had to talk to me about a scandal where her campaign had inadvertently released the names of sexual assault victims. People who didn't want to be named were named in a Heidi Heitkamp print ad. Terrible, terrible scandal for her campaign. I broke the story. She came on the radio show, and I thought it was a fine interview. And I give credit to say I wish Senator Heitkamp had been willing to talk to me before that, but I give credit for her for coming on. Now, after that interview, she immediately went back to ignoring me. And I guess that's what some North Dakota Democrats are going to do. They're just going to ignore people who are critical of them. I mean, Representative Buffalo is now following that same pattern, and, I don't think she should. In fact, I think the person to emulate with this is Senator Kevin Cramer, who for years has made himself available on, this podcast for one, on talk radio shows across the state. In fact, he regularly goes on Senator Heitkamp's brother's radio show. In fact, Joel Heitkamp is not only a former Democratic politician, but brother to a former Democratic U.S. senator. His radio station is at times used as a de facto arm of the North Dakota Democratic Party, right? I mean, pretty much all of the talent on there has worked in Democratic politics at one point or another, and yet Republicans still go on that show. And you know what? They should. Because politicians should have to face their critics, too. What politicians want, what Representative Buffalo definitely wants, is an echo chamber, right? I mean, they would rather have it where they're just allowed to go out there and spout their talking points, and, the reporters and media types just regurgitate them and nobody asks them any tough questions. That's what they want. And certainly that's what Representative Buffalo wants, right? And she's going to play the victim. I'm a victim because somebody asked me about my travel expenses. Oh, what a victim. She's being victimized, right? I mean, if you read the High Plains Reader article, and I've got it linked at sayanythingblog.com if you want to check it out. If you read the article, she goes on and on about how her life just had to deal with toxic people like me and other members of like Chris Berg from Valley News Live, or Scott Hennon, who's a right of center talk radio host syndicated across the state. We're such evil, toxic people, and she's not going to talk to us. And are you kidding me? We need to elect better people than that to office. And I'm not talking about her ideologically, right? I mean, this isn't a question. Voters should vote whoever they feel fits best for them ideologically, politically, partisan affiliation, whatever. That's up to you. But maybe a universal qualification for office should be, hey, you should be willing to face your critics. That's what I think. But again, these are polarized times. Echo chambers are popular. Even the public doesn't necessarily like being disagreed with. But I think we can aspire to something better. That's it. Senator Roers up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Senator Kristin Roers joins me now. She's a Republican from Fargo, and this week brought back, jump-started again, the legislation which would decriminalize recreational marijuana in North Dakota. Now, when I say decriminalize, I think people are that's distinct from legalizing. It would still be, I guess, to use the word criminal colloquially, it would still be illegal. If you got caught with marijuana, you would still face a fine or something along those lines. But it just, basically, the punishments wouldn't be severe. Kristen, am I getting that right?
Correct. It would be that you would not end up with a criminal record at the end. It would be like getting a speeding ticket. So it's still illegal to drive too fast, but you don't end up with a criminal record in the process.
Okay, so why did you bring this back? This bill actually, Shannon Roers Jones, who's a relative of yours in the State House, had
my cousin.
Your cousin had a decriminalization bill earlier in the session. It got defeated. You've brought this back. Why did you feel it needed to come back?
So it started out with Shannon's bill, and it just didn't get the time, the airtime, the ability to really have that deep and meaningful conversation. whether that be in committee or on the House floor. And so a couple of us in the Senate had a conversation and said, we aren't necessarily tied to it having to pass, but we feel like it should get its day in court essentially on the Senate side as well, so that we can make sure that this was the right decision. So we had two bills that the Legislative Council lawyers had said that it would be what they called germane on, that there would be an opportunity to put an amendment on and have it be similar topic style. And so one was in a medical marijuana bill and one was in a bill in judiciary. The medical marijuana bill created a challenge in that it would then have to pass by 2/3 of both houses because it is a recent referred measure. So we opted not to do that, but it was a group that had been thinking that that was the right place for it. So then myself, Senator Judy Lee, and Senator Diane Larson started having a conversation and saying, okay, is that judiciary bill the right place to have that conversation? So we actually brought in the Attorney General and had him come and meet with both the Republican and the Democratic caucuses and talk about what the current amendment was that was coming out of the Judiciary Committee and what the original bill looked like. And is there something in between that we want, or do we want to do something similar to the original bill?
Yeah, okay, so that's what I want to talk about, because the original bill, it failed by it was a slim margin in the House. It did fail, but it was a pretty slim margin in the House. So obviously, whenever that happens, I think there's usually an opportunity. Maybe if there's somebody on the fence, if you change the bill a little bit, maybe you knock them down off the fence, and they can come over and vote for the bill. So what changes? How is your amendment different from the bill that was defeated in the House?
I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure. So Representative Roers Jones did help us draft this with the Attorney General, and so I believe it's very similar.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what her original bill had for the finite details. But this includes, so for possession of less than a half an ounce, it's a fine only $250 offense. For ingestion, same thing. And for paraphernalia, fine only $100. So if you were caught with paraphernalia while smoking in possession, all three at once, total of $600 could be the fine. The House Judiciary had an amendment that they were bringing to the floor that started with what's called an infraction, which does create a criminal record but carries no jail time. It's up to $1,000 offense on your first offense, and then your second offense would be a Class B misdemeanor, and then, no, it wasn't even offense. It was less than a half an ounce infraction. Half an ounce to an ounce was a Class B misdemeanor, and then an ounce to a half a pound was a Class A misdemeanor, which actually would have been an upcharge from current statute, and anything greater than a half a pound would have been a felony. Now, as we talked to the Attorney General and BCI, they said once you get into those larger quantities, they actually charge under a different statute, so you didn't need those enhanced penalties for larger, because you'd get charged for distribution or something of that effect. So that's what we came forward with.
Okay, so that's it'll be interesting to see, how that. Well, obviously, it was that amendment was approved on the Senate floor. It's going to be interesting to see what the House does with that. Now, we'll go to conference committee. Yeah, when I asked you why you brought this back, you said basically you wanted to make sure this issue got its day in court, so to speak, in the Senate, and it's gotten that now. But why is this important for North Dakota overall? I mean, why is this important for North Dakota citizens, for our society and our state, to reduce the criminal penalties for marijuana and non-medical marijuana?
Yep. So I think that there's a couple things. First of all, we know that as a culture, recreational marijuana is becoming more and more normalized. It used to be this very evil drug. I remember when I was growing up, my brother has addiction issues, and everybody, marijuana is this horrible gateway drug. And I think we're realizing that for some people who already have an addictive personality, yes, that might be true, but it's not true for everyone. So I think that we're starting to just realize that it's not one big blanket statement. And then there are two other pieces for me. So as a nurse, occupational licensing, once you have a criminal record, it makes it difficult to get certain jobs, whether it be in this state or any state. And so really looking at, as we do all of our criminal justice reforms, how do we start to try and look at what are the things that maybe we shouldn't be penalizing people for life? And then that third piece is very related to the occupational licensing, but on a bigger scale. Just employment in general, our workforce. And so either we need to loosen the rules on criminal records, or we need to figure out how to stop creating criminal records for things that really aren't, they're not a violent crime. They're not hurting really anybody but yourself. And so really looking at how do we look at this from a much more holistic perspective, and how do we move forward and really try and kind of, I would say, keep up with the times.
I support the legislation, and I think you're right. I mean, do we want to, if you get caught smoking a doob when you're 19 and you get a criminal record, that's with you forever, especially in 2019 when I used to do criminal records background checks for a living. Mm-hmm. And even in my years, I was doing this, probably 17, 18 years ago now. Boy, I'm getting old. It was a lot harder even back then. I mean, a lot of these statewide data, I can remember making phone calls up to like Rowlett County, or even having to drive up there, depending on how thorough the client wanted to be, and having to go through their criminal records, county by county, place by place, making sure if somebody lived in Cass County but maybe got busted something across the Moorhead in Minnesota in Clay County, that record's over there. That's all easier now. I don't think people realize it's not that we're keeping more records or that the records are suddenly more public. They're just more accessible than they were. And so our ability, I think, to overcome mistakes we may have made when we were younger. I mean, it used to be you could just up and move. The reason why my family's from Alaska is because my grandpa had a scandalous life in Minnesota and decided to move to Alaska, which is where you went, the last frontier, if you got in trouble in the 1940s and 50s, right? I mean, the Ports, the family lineage of the Ports are a bunch of rogues and brigands going way back. But suffice it to say, my point is you can't get past a lot of these records. So I like the idea of, hey, this doesn't need to be so serious. It's smoking a doob. Let's put that in context. I like that.
And I think one other thing that this really has a benefit with is if we can pair this idea with the bill that's already been signed by the governor with the record sealing, I think that we really can make some substantive changes in people's lives.
Right.
I know Representative Roers Jones was the sponsor on that. She sits on the F5 organization board, and we sit together. These are things that are really personal to her and very passionate. So I think she's really seen people whose lives have been affected, and these are some things that we can do. People who really want to re-enter society and really want to be a productive member of our state. And I can't imagine a person that is a legislator that doesn't want a person to turn their life around, that doesn't want them to be able to be a productive member. And so I hope that we can move forward. Now, the conference committee process is going to be very difficult. The judiciary committees are where this bill struggled, and that's who controls the conference committee process. And so I think once we find out who's going to be on the conference committee, people contacting them and telling them, look, and I think the best people to have these conversations with their legislator is, I don't smoke, but I'm an employer and I want to be able to hire these people.
Yeah.
Getting the word out from that perspective, I think, is going to be the most effective.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in using marijuana at all. I tried it once in high school. I can admit that, but it didn't do much for me.
I've never even tried it. When you grow up with a brother with addiction, it just doesn't have that appeal. But I get that there are people who it has ruined their lives, and it's just insane.
Well, and it's honestly, it's fine. It can be used recreationally. There's plenty of I know responsible people, very successful people who use marijuana today. Some of the names, would probably surprise you.
Oh, no. They don't, I bet. and by ruining their lives, I mean the criminal record,
right,
not
exactly,
marijuana.
Exactly.
So
I am very much in favor of this bill. I think that's a step in the right direction. The only other thing I wanted to ask you about, and I don't want to be perceived as letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, but do we need to move to a place where recreational marijuana is legal in North Dakota?
I think that's a question for the people, as little as I like the actual refer measure process, because I think it ends up a clunky and sloppy process on the back end.
Very much so.
I don't think that the group of people that are out here as legislators are the ones that need to make that decision. If it goes to a vote of the people and they say yes, then that's true. But I want to make sure that they're saying yes because they actually want legalized, not because they don't want criminal.
Right.
I think that there's that distinction. And there was a group of the population who voted for Measure 3 because they were tired of the criminal side of it, not because they actually want it to be an open industry out in, and it's a matter of philosophy.
Sure.
You either do or you don't. And I think that people have a right to their own opinion. But I do think that we need to at least take this step so that we make sure that when that question is asked, do you want it legalized? Yeah. We're asking the right question.
Well, and a lot of times politics is, what progress can I make today? Right. You're very rarely going to get everything you want all at once. A lot of times it's, well, we can all agree on at least this much. So let's do this much. And then we'll continue to have the debate about the rest. And I think that's just fine. And I very much support your legislation. I hope it passes. My only quibble, and it gets to the point, I worry because I think the consequences and the ruining people's lives with criminal records who maybe are otherwise just perfectly fine people and they smoked a joint when they were 19. I think that's all great. Let's do that. What I worry about is there's another problem, which is that as long as it remains illegal, there's going to be a black market for it. And that black market is going to be served by traffickers, by criminal organizations, often people who have their fingers in multiple types of criminal organizations. Marijuana is a hugely lucrative market in the United States. And I would like that market to be served by entrepreneurs and business people, not criminals. That's
yeah. And I think from my perspective, I feel like the federal government needs to act first. Yeah. I struggle with legalizing at a state perspective when you still can't use a banking.
That's true.
And you can't use the banking industry. So whether it be the whatever States Act, I think that's the one in the Senate, right, or whatever the House version is, whatever one of those passes at a federal level, I think that's the first step. Then a state can look at legalizing because we can do it in the right way, where you look at states that have legalized it, they still have huge issues with black market because the price is so high out in the open because they have to do so much regulation.
Well, because
it has to be a cash business, all of those things. And so I think we do have to start at the federal level at least.
It's because the legal
that Schedule 1.
Yeah, the legal capitalists are fighting with one arm tied behind their back, right? I mean, they're the ones, they have to abide by all the laws, and it's complex.
That's not a true free market.
Right. So it's in the federal government, there's still prohibition. I feel like, I know you're a faithful podcast listener, so both Senator, I'm sure you heard Senator Kramer and Congressman Armstrong express their support last week for the States Act. And I think a bill like that, even our polarized times, when you've got Elizabeth Warren and Kevin Kramer on the same piece of legislation, I feel like we're doing pretty good. So, hopefully we're going to see some progress at the federal level. That'll free up states like North Dakota to make better policy decisions. But in the here and now, I think that your bill is probably the best we can hope out of this legislative session, and I really hope it passes.
I would agree. And I want to thank you for having this podcast. It keeps the roads a little safer between Bismarck and Fargo because I'm less tempted to play with my phone the entire drive every weekend. And so podcasts keep my brain engaged enough to be able to pay attention to the road. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Senator Roers, thanks for your time.
Yes, thank you.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. Remember, new episodes come out Monday through Friday. If you're listening to this podcast on a platform that allows you to rate or review, something like iTunes or Stitcher, boy, I'd sure appreciate it if you'd leave an honest rating or an honest review, or lie and say I'm awesome. That's fine too. Just don't lie and say I suck. That would be terrible. If you have any feedback for the show, you can email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. You can certainly send in questions for our weekly guests, Senator Kevin Kramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, and I will ask those questions when you send them in. You can send them in at any time. Follow me on social media. On Facebook, I'm Rob Port. On Twitter, I'm @RobPort. Say Anything Blog has a page on Facebook and a Twitter account as well. If you want just, the columns and the blog posts and the podcasts, subscribe to the Say Anything pages. If you want pictures of my kids and maybe random posts about baseball, subscribe to my personal accounts. Either way, you'll get all of the stuff from the blog and all the political commentary. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.